It's a shop which is famous for being the favourite watering hole of Patsy and Absolutely Fabulous. What you don't expect to happen in Harvey Nichols is for anyone to be shot in the head at point-blank range.
He'd gone up behind her and shot her in the head from behind, and then she'd hit the floor and then he'd shot her in the face 3 times.
As far as we were concerned, once the professionals, the police were involved, the problem had gone away. The professionals had dealt with it.
It was a crime of almost breathtaking callousness.
The man who tried to kill her will never be free to
The
harm
audio
again.
was too graphic to be broadcast.
May provide some closure for the victim's families, targeted young women unable to defend themselves.
Colin Sutton was a detective chief inspector and senior investigating officer in the Metropolitan Police. He led the investigations into some of the most complex and high-profile cases ever, bringing dangerous criminals to justice.
Then heard screaming. The Night Stalker calls out to attack another 146 victims.
In this series, he will take you inside those cases and show you how he caught these criminals using nothing but pure detective work. This is The Real Manhunter.
Now been found guilty on all 29 of those charges. The oldest victim, 18.
The officer in charge described it as a
The
senseless
life
tragedy.
sentence may provide some closure for his victims' families.
It was a Tuesday evening in September 2005, and I'm on-call SIO for West London. And I remember getting the call, and the control that give us the jobs said, "Oh, I've got a double fatal shooting for you, Mr. Sutton." At the time, we'd been suffering from a few shootings in West London, mostly around sort of Harleston, Stonebridge Park Estate, that sort of thing. And I assumed that's where I'd be going, and I think I might even have said that to her, whereabouts in Harleston am I going? And he said, no, it's a bit of a funny one, so it's a Harvey Nichols.
I was in the office. So Colin was the kind of guy that he's a DCI, and it wasn't that normal actually for DCIs to come running around the office and say, "Come on, Dave, we're going out." You know, ordinarily, DCI would say, "The job's come in. I want you to go to. When you get there, let me know." That type of way. But Colin was as a detective, was a man who wanted to be involved.
I think most of the team would have gone home by then. It was in the evening, but we had a system whereby we sort of ring each other round, and I scrambled the team to come to Knightsbridge, to Harvey Nichols.
These cases are obviously rare, fortunately. It's got huge profile. It's a major London store. A young girl being shot at her place of work, truly awful.
How can that happen? Why can there be a double fatal shooting at Harvey Nichols?
It's got a touch of glamour to it. What you don't expect to happen in Harvey Nichols is for anyone to be shot in the head at point-blank range.
When Claire was little, she was incredibly shy. She didn't like to be in the limelight. As she got older, in her teens, her confidence started to grow. She was very gentle, she was very loving and very trusting.
She came from you describe it as quite a middle-class family and background. She was a little bit inexperienced in the ways of the world in many ways, and certainly in terms of relationships with men.
She'd love a party. She was like any other 21, 22-year-old. The only difference was that Claire was somewhat naive, I think. She had dated very few boys, and she always had high expectations of any relationship she was in.
Claire was, she was a bright, intelligent, articulate, very attractive young lady who wanted to work in the field of doing makeup and so forth. She'd been working there for some time. She absolutely loved the job.
She was beautiful. She was beautiful inside and out. She was always interested when she was about 12. I recall her. She loved to apply makeup. She would experiment, which sort of got her into that sector.
Michal Pech was a security guard at Harvey Nichols. He was a Slovakian, and he'd been in the Slovakian army where he learnt firearms skills, come to Britain, got a job working at Harvey Nichols, where he met Claire, who was a beautiful young woman.
He was 10 years or so older than her. He'd, seen a lot of life. He was in the military. And he obviously just fell completely in love with her and, was just absolutely besotted with her. And she didn't want the relationship to be that serious that quickly and didn't really know what she wanted, I think, but knew that she didn't want to be tied to Michal Pech in the way that he did. But you can't always, predict how somebody's going to react, I guess, to those sort of circumstances.
A girl had been shot, and that this guy had shot himself. We knew that before we got there. We didn't know any detail about what the relationship was, who he was. We just had a girl shot.
It would appear on the face of it to be a fairly tight investigation because the suspect is there and they are deceased. Therefore, a lot of the work that would be involved in identification and interview strategies, etc., is not necessary.
So it's obviously one of those sort of really tragic cases, but it's also one of those where you can't jump to conclusions or make assumptions. Although it looks for all the world like it's a murder and then followed by a suicide, you still have to respond to it. There's still been a murder there, hasn't there? There's a murder there, even though the suspect is now dead. And you need not to make the assumptions and go there and do all the things to investigate the scene, preserve it, and make sure that it's done properly. So we responded to it, as if it were just a murder with no suspect.
It was obvious, really, quite quickly, because you very quickly research the people concerned and identify that there are issues within this case. Certainly, those of us in the office that were looking at the people concerned knew that this would develop into a major crime and a major investigation for the police service and the criminal justice system, really, from day one.
Harvey Nichols in London's Knightsbridge, world-famous department store with its wealthy clientele in a very wealthy area of the capital. Not the sort of place that I'd have expected to get sent to for a double fatal shooting, but that was the call I got in September 2005. I just happened to be in central London when I got the call, so I was here before a lot of my team, but I needed the normal sort of forensic work done and local inquiries, so I called them all over here. That then gave us the problem of where could we do the briefing. But since we were in the cosmetics department, there are all the chairs where customers sit to have makeup applied by the staff. And we were able to use those, and you've got this slightly surreal scene of a murder squad sitting down on the makeup chairs with me behind the counter giving them the briefing.
So you had a counter in front of her, highly polished ceramic tiles on the floor, the usual sort of beauty products all around her. And you couldn't at first see her, but he'd gone up behind her and shot her in the head from behind, and then she'd hit the floor and then he'd shot her in the face.
What we were told by the eyewitnesses was that Claire Bernal was working as usual on the cosmetics counter. Pech had come into the store, he'd shot her twice, and then she'd fallen to the ground and he turned the gun on himself and shot himself in the head. The
distressing thing, I suppose, from our point of view, was the amount of blood. The shooter, Michal Pech, who had killed himself, was not far away with a handgun, cartridge cases dotted about.
We were able to do some immediate searching, and we actually found 4 cartridge cases. But we could only really account for 3 of the shots, 2 at Claire and 1 to Pech at the end.
So we dealt with the scene, retrieval of the weapon, retrieval of the bodies. Colin had to deal with the press outside, management of the store.
We needed to find that 4th bullet. And I, in fact, got a call from a senior executive at Harvey Nichols who said, when can we have our shop back? It's costing us tens of thousands of pounds every hour that it's shut. And I pointed out that probably one of his loyal and wealthy customers wouldn't be too impressed if they moved something on a shelf and found a bloody bullet behind it. And he understood that issue instantly and just said, Mr. Sutton, do what you need to do and just tell me when we can have our shot back.
At the time, my role was known as a receiver in the incident room. Therefore, I'm not deployed to the scene. The team were deployed. I remained in the office, sort of instruction to the set of circumstances that the team would bring back.
I was still busy with the scene, so I just had a conversation with my brother and said, do us a favour, will you pick up the post-mortem the next day, because I'm going to be here all night and tomorrow.
I attended a post-mortem as part of the processes to prove causation of death. During the post-mortem, both Claire and Pech were in the same mortuary. I remember thinking at the time, this is somehow not right. The process was fine, it was perfectly normal, but from a moral and a personal perspective, it did not feel right to see the two laying effectively in the same place.
As my team carried on with the normal things that you do in the early hours of a homicide investigation, I knew that we were going to have to find out why a man who said he loved and cherished a young woman had just walked into her place of work, into a shop, and brutally shot her, killed her, and then killed himself. And the big question we needed to answer quickly, was he acting alone? There was just then so many questions as to what's somebody doing with a handgun in Harvey Nichols? Why has it come to that? And it's all set really in a situation of so much sadness, because you've got this very attractive 23-year-old girl that we then found out, had really loved her job, loved what she was doing working there, and had this difficult relationship with this man who used to work there. It transpired that Claire Bernal, who was the victim, shouldn't really have been working that evening. She'd swapped shifts with her flatmate for various reasons. And when the story started unfolding and we realised that the shooter, her ex-boyfriend, Michal Pech, had gone there to find her, we assumed he must have gone to her home first, because he would have expected her not to be at work. She shouldn't have been at work that day. And he used to work for Harvey Nichols. He was a security man there. That's how they'd met. And he had kind of access to her rotas and shifts. And there then became the worry that if he's gone to the flat that she shares with this colleague, what's happened there? Have we got another victim, the colleague, lying dead in this flat in Dulwich where they'd lived? So that became quite a priority for us, was to get down to Dulwich to check on the safety of Claire's co-worker. When we discovered that Claire was not meant to be working, that she'd actually swapped her shift with her colleague and flatmate, we realised that the likelihood was that Pech would have come here to Dulwich, to the flat they shared first, because that's where he would expect Claire to have been. And that then raised the issue to us, was she safe? We came to the flat, knocked on the door, and we got no answer. And we were sort of debating whether or not there was a real risk and should we try and force entry. And we were sitting outside in the car at the end of this road, and this young lady came along in a tracksuit and with a gym bag, and she sat on the wall just over there outside the entrance to the flat and was talking on a mobile phone. And we went and approached her and realised she was talking in a language which sounded like Russian, and we knew that that's where Claire's friend hailed from. And so we asked her if she said, yes, I'm sitting here because I can't get into the flat because I haven't got a key, and I was waiting for Claire to come back with the key. We then had to break the news that Claire, her colleague, her friend, her flatmate, was dead. Having found out that Claire's workmate was safe, what we then needed to do was to do a bit more investigation into Michal Pech, and because at that point we don't know who he is, who his associates are. Is he a one-off? Is he a so-called lone wolf? And is it only about Claire? Or does he live, frequent, associate with a lot of people who are armed? And, and are there any more firearms and ammunition back where he lived and all things like that. So we found out that he lived in a house in South Tottenham. And again, while those are the team that are doing what they can with the scene and witnesses at Harvey Nichols, Tony McEwen and I go to South Tottenham to this house. And it was a house on the end of a terrace, and it was quite derelict almost. It was not in very good condition, and the grass was 3 feet high in the garden. There was a window or two broken, and the front door was kind of hanging open, but just sort of ajar when we got there. And it's in the early hours of the morning, and we've got a panda car from the local police station in Tottenham and a couple of uniformed PCs that came with us. And ultimately we know that although we're going in there thinking that we might be looking for firearms or people with firearms, we knew that we had no chance of getting armed backup. It's just not. It's one of these situations where it's obviously dangerous, but it's not dangerous enough. We just knew we couldn't get that sort of backup. And you do it, you know, quite often as a police officer. Tony and I sat there and sort of looked at each other and said, well, we know it's not 100% safe, but 99% of the time it will be, so come on, let's do it. And we went into this house, and we got a torch, a little mini mag light, that's all. And the whole house is quite sort of dark and creepy, really, because it was all sort of a bit threadbare. And we found out there were actually 7 men sleeping in the house that night. And all of them from Eastern Europe, and all of them were working on building sites. And Pech had been the 8th man who'd been living there. And there was one of the young men, who I think his name was Jörg, and he was about 6 feet 8 inches tall. He was huge. And he was Polish, and he could speak very good English. And he kind of translated for the rest of them and was, you know, absolutely helpful. In fact, he took Tony and I then to Earl's Court and pointed out to us the hotel where he knew Pech had been staying once he'd got back. And we were able to search his room there, and we found nothing. There were no more firearms. But it was one of the newspapers reported the next day that armed police stormed a house in Tottenham. And I remember Tony McEwen saying, unarmed police with a sense of humour and a biro stormed a house in Tottenham. When we spoke to Claire's friend outside the flat in Dulwich, she was obviously devastated at the death of her friend, flatmate and workmate. But as she started to tell us more about what had gone on in this relationship between Claire and Michal Pech, we came to realise there was an awful lot about this murder and suicide that we had yet to understand.
In late 2004, Claire had moved up to London. She was working in Selfridges for a short while, and then she was moved to Harvey Nichols. So Claire was working on a beauty counter in Harvey Nichols, where there were 4 women that would rotate. One was a senior woman, she'd been there for 13 years, and then there was Natalia, she was a bit older than Claire, and she played quite a key part in what happened to Claire. And then there was another younger woman who was working there part-time. These 2 young women and Claire moved into a flat in Dulwich together, late January. Claire started speaking of Michal Pech, and she said, you know, he would come up to her counter. He was a security guard. And I think it was sometime in February he asked Claire out.
To begin with, I think you have to look at the origins of their relationship. Claire had only gone out with Pech on a couple of occasions.
The girls, apparently, they didn't like him. They didn't want him to come to the flat. They made it very clear they didn't want him to visit Claire's, the flat that they shared. They only dated for 3 weeks, and that's the way it looked like. They'd go for coffee, they'd meet up, but it was getting to the point where he wanted to be with her all the time. He resented when she came home, when she came to visit me, and when she wanted to go out with her friends.
He had become very obsessive and very serious about their relationship very quickly. And Claire didn't really know how to deal with that. She knew that's not what she wanted.
So after 3 weeks, It was a pre-planned holiday to visit his mother in Slovakia. He was from Bratislava. He'd asked Claire to go to the airport to see him off. And he returned back from Slovakia. Julie, Claire, went to the airport to meet him. And I didn't hear from her till the following day. She phoned me up. She was very upset. And she said that, he said, look, Claire, I've got a really heavy case. I don't want to trudge it across London. Is it right if I stay over? And Claire knew that her flatmates were uncomfortable about him staying, but he did. The next morning, and she said to me, I just wanted him to go, Mum, so this is the call. I wanted to be on my own. She said, I was tired, so, you know, I took him, walked with him. He insisted me walking him to the station. He wouldn't catch the train. And the second train came in. I mean, we're talking about sort of February, late February. It was cold. She just wanted to be on her own. He hadn't taken his case. The case was still in the apartment. He'd said, oh, I'll collect it later on. And she said, you do what you like. Because although Claire was very loving, very pleasing, very giving, she also had a very stubborn side, even when she was little. So if she made up her mind about something, that was it. Totally. You could not budge her. And she said, you do what you like, Michael. I'm going back. Just get out of my sight. She went back to the flat. She went upstairs, took his suitcase and put it straight outside. With that, he refused to go. He sat there outside. The girls had by this time come home. They, in no uncertain terms, told him to go. And reluctantly, after 2 hours, he left.
There must have been something about him which concerned her, because she quickly tried to move on. She did not want to have a relationship. But he was obviously one of those men that felt that if he couldn't have her, then no one would. And he became obsessed with her.
And on this call I had with Claire, she said, Mum, I've had enough. I'm going to end the relationship with her. This is making me feel really, really uncomfortable. And he got really quite aggressive with the girls. So she messaged him and said, Michael, look, this isn't working out. We can be friends, but I don't want us to have a relationship anymore. That's when the stalking began.
She'd had conversations with her friends and her family, explaining that, you know, this relationship was causing her difficulties because she felt it was all going too far and he wanted it to be much more serious than she did. And I guess that's kind of how the relationship fizzled out. But Pech was not a man to take no for an answer.
The next day, there he was as a security guard. He had every reason to stand close to Claire's counter. He was very apologetic. He said, Claire, I'm really, really sorry. I've got problems at home. I didn't mean to upset you. Can we be friends? And she said, yeah, we can be friends. That's fine, Michael. He must have messaged her 50 times that day. And every opportunity, he was going up to her counter.
The stalking by Pech of Claire Bernal just became so bad. There was one point where she was averaging 50 texts or calls per day from him. And she didn't want to know. You know, she wasn't returning them. He was quite obviously obsessed.
Over the next 3 weeks, he became increasingly more present in Claire's life. The very first day after she ended the relationship, he followed her home with a bunch of flowers. And she said, Michael, please leave me alone. She left the flowers outside as a demonstration that she meant what she said. Wherever Claire he was, he would stand in line of her counter, he'd watch her in mirrors, he'd follow her home, he'd plead with her. And during those 3 weeks, he was getting increasingly more agitated.
really engaged upon a course of stalking of her, and he would appear at her flat, he'd appear at railway stations when he knew she was travelling to and from work.
There was an incident, so here we are, we're now the sort of fourth week. She was on the platform of the tube and she saw that Michael was coming towards her. She ran and she jumped on the train. He jumped on the train after her and he was sitting opposite her. And she was crying and she said, "Michael, if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to have to report you." And he went very close to her face and he said, "If you report me, I will kill you." And she felt at the time that her world was shrinking. It started to affect her health. She was having sleepless nights. She was making mistakes at work. She was being told off at work.
Eventually, Claire felt that she had no choice but to take the appropriate action about this stalking that she was suffering.
One of the girls reported him. The head of security saw that it was true, and he said, "You go up to a counter," another counter, but he ignored it.
The reaction of the management at Harvey Nichols was to make sure that Pech was deployed in a different part of the building, but he was using the internal CCTV to see where Claire was, and then going and being close to her and talking to her, completely against the instructions he'd received from his management, and he was warned about it. He persisted, and eventually he was suspended by them.
But he could only suspend him from the store. He was still standing outside, following her home. And Claire was advised by the head of security to go to the police because that was the only way that it potentially could stop, that there could be a restraining order.
Pech continued this behaviour, and Claire got quite disturbed when she heard that he'd been asking around colleagues what the penalty for murder was in the UK. And his stalking behaviour continued, and eventually she had no choice but to go to the police and report him. And they came and actually arrested him while he was at work at Harvey Nichols. And at that point, Harvey Nichols said, "Sorry, that's it, you're sacked." And he was fired from the job.
He was escorted out by 2 police officers in front of Claire. Claire phoned me up. She was crying. She said, "Mum, he looked so angry with me." And yes, Claire felt guilt that she had been the one to get him dismissed.
The police took the report seriously and they investigated it, and Pech was charged and had to appear at court. And that was possibly the catalyst that tipped him over the edge. That was probably the thing that he realised then, that his dream of his relationship with Claire Bernal was never going to happen.
After Pech was arrested, life got back to normal for Claire. He was no longer harassing her. The police had dealt with it. Unbeknownst to us, he had gone to Belmarsh prison for breaking bail conditions, and then he was given the same conditions with a pending court case to be heard in August, towards the end of August.
He wasn't given a custodial sentence from his stalking crime that he had committed against Claire. This is one of those situations where the police, etc., try to do what they can. The crime, as I'm sure any young women who are subject to it will tell you, is truly awful. And it takes real guts for young women to come and report it and keep reporting it. And it's terrifying for them. The police in this situation did what they could. They charged him, put him before the court process, and then he was released.
Having been charged with harassing Claire, Pech was bailed by the court. There would have been conditions for him not to have gone near Claire, but of course, can the police enforce those conditions 24 hours a day? No, they can't. what I find bizarre in this case is that despite being on bail from a court, Pech was able to return back to Slovakia, enrol on a firearms refresher course.
It looks like he took that kind of cliched view that, well, if I can't have you, then nobody can. Because what he did was he got a coach journey to and from his homeland. While he was there, he took a proficiency test to get a licence for an automatic pistol, and quite lawfully bought the pistol and ammunition, but then hid it in his holdall, got on the coach, came back to the UK, smuggled this gun in with the ammunition through Dover, through the customs.
You know, ultimately, this is a man who clearly disturbed. I mean, it's easy to come by guns in Europe at times if you're really looking for one. How hard is it to get it into the country? That's debatable. I mean, you know, it's not as difficult sometimes, unfortunately, as you think it could be. Anyway, he managed it.
It seemed extraordinary, really, that despite being on bail, he was able to come in without any apparent proper searches of his possessions being carried out. So that here he was, back in London, having been freed on bail from a court, now armed with a gun, still totally obsessed with Claire, and with clearly one thing only in mind, and that was to kill her.
And you've then got tragedy waiting to happen. You've got a frustrated, demented man almost, in possession of a machine pistol that he can use with ammunition, and he's taken the decision, I'm going to kill her and then kill myself.
There was a dark cloud hanging over Claire, and that she might have to see Pech again in court. He was still pleading not guilty to harassment and threats to kill. As it happened, it was settled out of court. At the very last minute, he'd pleaded guilty to harassment, and Claire was advised to drop the threats to kill. It would be difficult to prove, and she was happily accepted that. And she said to me, Mum, finally I can put this whole awful episode to bed. He'll get a minimal fine, maybe a community service, and these words will always ring in my always be with me. She said, now finally people will believe me. As far as we were concerned, once the professionals, the police were involved, Michael no longer was a problem. The problem had gone away. The professionals had dealt with it.
Pech appears at court on the harassment charge. He pleads guilty. And Claire's quite relieved by that because it meant she didn't have to go and give evidence against him. And she's now thinking that the whole thing is over, that, that it's behind her.
Within a few days of pleading guilty, he'd gone on to take Claire's life, and that was because he'd been bailed by a court which clearly did not see that she was at serious risk of any harm from him.
What nobody expected was that he was going to take a large dose of cocaine, go into the store with an automatic pistol, killing her and then killing himself, and that's what he did while he was on bail.
Claire was working late. There were 4 witnesses. One young woman who was directly opposite Claire. And I found out this young woman put her hand up and looked at Claire and as if to say, 10 minutes to go. And Claire gave her this beautiful smile. And then she saw a shadow behind Claire. And in that instant, she thought maybe it was a boyfriend who was meeting Claire. And then Michael raised a gun, and he shot Claire in the back of the head. She fell. And with that, he shot her 3 times in the face. He then turned the gun on himself.
Claire was laying there in an enormous amount of blood, and the suspect, the shooter, Michal Pech, who had killed himself was not far away.
Through the weakness of the law, he was able to go into Harvey Nichols early one evening and then take her life in the most horrific fashion, with her colleagues, members of the public, all standing there as this lunatic goes up. And she would have perhaps known what was coming, because she must have been terrified of him.
I think it was about 1:45 in the morning, and there was a loud bang on the door, and my partner went down, my ex-partner went down, and I could hear that it was the police, and one of the police officers said, "It's Claire." And I knew at that moment that she'd gone. And I said, "How did it happen?" And they said, "She was shot." I said, "It was Michael, wasn't it?" And they just nodded. In that moment, it's so enormous, your brain can't take it in. You can't process it.
As I guessed from the very start, there was a huge amount of media interest in this case because it was so unusual and it was so tragic. As the story unfolded and as more became known about Claire and about Michal Pech and about the court cases, it was not only tragic, but it was sort of avoidable.
Claire's case was so high profile. It wasn't that she was a young, beautiful girl who was stalked and murdered. It was where it was. It was Harvey Nichols, the most glamorous store in the world.
The press were, I would say, were very helpful in that as well, because I think they saw the issue. They saw that this was a chance to do some real good, to make a real difference, so that people in the future wouldn't or would be less likely to suffer in the way that Claire did.
There were a lot of magazines and TV programmes that wanted Claire's story and wanted to hear it from a mother's point of view. But I felt that Claire wasn't around to fight her battle, for want of a better word, and I needed to be Claire's voice piece. I underestimated the danger Claire was in, but also so did the professionals, and so did Claire. Nobody understood the danger of stalking. I needed to know everything. And the only door that was open, really, was the inquest. There were women out there, 10,000 women at that time who were reporting domestic violence, and some of them had had their faces slashed, and nobody would have seen the risk that Claire was in. And also it didn't follow the normal pattern of behaviour of stalking. They knew that I was intent on getting the inquest, looking into the circumstances leading up to Claire, because there wasn't domestic homicide reviews at the time. It hadn't become law.
It was, I guess, at a time when the response of law enforcement and the courts to stalking as a kind of a crime and a phenomenon in its own right was pretty much in its infancy. And though there were measures you could take and there were offences that he was committing, it kind of wasn't joined up in the way that it is now.
Because it was so high profile, I got to meet some amazing people that have become quite important in my life. I got to meet Carol Faruqi, whose daughter Rana was stabbed 16 times by an ex-boyfriend. I met Stella Moore, whose daughter Tanya was shot dead like Claire. I also met Frank Mullane, who is the CEO of the charity I work for, supporting bereaved families after domestic homicide and steering them through the review process or inquests.
And great credit to Claire's family, particularly her mother. They went on to try and toughen up those laws to prevent any similar tragedies from occurring again.
Together we started to attend conferences, started to understand far more about mental abuse, coercive control, where that obsession and fixation can have fatal consequences. Stella decided to work locally And Carol Faruqi and myself, alongside other professionals, decided to set up a charity called Protection Against Stalking.
I'm Jan Berry. I was a police officer for 38 years. I finished off as the chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Nowadays, I'm a trustee with a domestic abuse charity, and I'm the co-CEO of Protection Against Stalking. I've always greatly admired people who've taken total tragedy in their own lives and turned it to good. I was asked to help Tricia and to maybe refocus Protection Against Stalking. I didn't have any hesitation in agreeing. When Protection Against Stalking became a charity in 2010, the first thing it did was to establish the National Stalking Helpline. Today it's still managed by the Susie Lamplugh Trust and is really the first port of call for anyone who's going to be a victim of stalking, or sometimes professionals who need to understand it a little bit more. They then got the legislation changed so that there were 2 offences which said stalking in their title.
The Section 2RA, which is a lesser offence, but it still carries a sentence, or the Section 4A, which is fear of violence. So a victim doesn't have to be physically abused, or if they can demonstrate they have fear, then it has a sentence up to 10 years. So in record time, in 10 months, we managed to get that through.
They then made sure that there was greater awareness and training programmes out there. Stalking is still not well understood by criminal justice professionals, by community safety partners, so there's still some work there. It's not properly understood by the public, so if you are being stalked, you don't necessarily know about it. So we want to carry on raising awareness, but most importantly, we want to provide support or ensure that there is support for victims of stalking.
It's difficult to understand how somebody could react to rejection by somebody that they thought they loved and wanted to be with by killing that person.
What the investigation did throw up was some serious questions about the laws of harassment. And I think what it showed was that Claire's murder was totally unnecessary if the law and systems had been working properly and that the issue of harassment had been taken seriously by the judiciary, which I don't believe they were. Claire would still be alive to this day.
Oh, if only you could put the clock back. But that's not possible. If only we had hindsight. I'm so proud of Tricia that even now, 15 years on, she's still using her experience to help other people. And I'm delighted to work with her and give her that bit of support as well.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing, as they say. But nobody understood stalking then. Claire didn't understand stalking. She didn't even know she was being stalked.
It happens, we know that it happens. It doesn't make it easy to understand how someone can react like that. Claire's mother used the tragedy to the best effect she could by making herself a voice for victims of stalking and making herself part of the pressure on the government to change the law, to make the law stronger and to give the courts and the police more powers when they're dealing with these offences and when they're trying to protect, more often than not, vulnerable young women from unwanted attention from men.